Millionaire fired the nanny for no reason, until his daughter said something that left him in shock. Emily Carter stood before the dark wooden door of the study, her hand resting on the cold doorknob, her heart pounding so hard she felt she could hear it. She had no idea why she had been summoned at that hour. The morning had passed completely normally. Lily had finished her bowl of oatmeal and even giggled when Emily imitated a little rabbit from their familiar picture book. There had been no sign, no warning at all, that today would end this way. "Come in." Daniel Whitmore's voice came from inside, deep, even, carrying no particular emotion. Emily took a slow breath and pushed the door open. The study looked the same as always, neat, orderly. The familiar scent of wood and black coffee lingered in the air. Daniel sat behind his desk, his eyes fixed on the file in front of him, not looking up right away. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but to Emily it felt like an entire lifetime. "Emily," he finally said, lifting his gaze, "we will be terminating your contract as of today." The words fell into the room like a heavy object, making no sound, yet strong enough to leave her reeling. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Emily asked, though she had heard him perfectly clearly. "Your services are no longer required," Daniel continued, his voice flat, as if he were reading from a financial report. "You will be fully compensated, including severance." Emily stood frozen. She waited for an explanation, a reason, a look that might suggest this was difficult to say. But there was nothing. Daniel lowered his eyes, signed a document, then slid it across the desk toward her. "This decision is not related to your performance or work ethic," he added, as if reciting a prepared line of consolation. "Then, what is the reason?" Her throat felt painfully dry. Daniel paused for a moment, then shook his head. "I have nothing further to add. There was no argument, no opportunity, no thank you for 3 years of caring for a motherless child." Emily nodded mechanically. She knew that if she spoke again, her voice would shatter. She left the study without remembering how she had walked out. Only when the door of her small room closed behind her did she allow herself to sink onto the bed. The room she had lived in for 3 years suddenly felt unfamiliar. She began to pack. There wasn't much. 3 pairs of jeans, a few simple shirts. The pale blue dress, the one Lily had once said looked like a princess's, was folded carefully. Emily paused when she saw the small pink plastic comb Lily always used to brush her favorite doll's hair. She picked up the comb, her fingers trembling slightly, then set it back on the desk. It belonged to Lily. It belonged to this house. It belonged to a life she was no longer allowed to touch. As she pulled her suitcase out of the room, Emily heard a child's laughter echo somewhere in her memory, not in the present. Lily was napping. Perhaps that was for the best. Emily was not sure she could say goodbye without breaking down. She counted every step as she walked down the front stairs, as if doing so might keep her from thinking about the past 3 years. The suitcase slipped from her hand and hit the stone floor with a dull thud. Emily bent to pick it up, biting her lip until it bled to stop the tears from spilling over. The iron gate opened, then closed behind her. Emily did not turn around. If she did, she knew she would not be able to leave. And some farewells, no matter how cruel, do not allow a person to be weak. She walked away, carrying with her the feeling that she had lost not just a job, but a family. The car rolled slowly away from the gravel road leading out of the Whitmore estate. Emily sat in the back seat, both hands resting on her suitcase, as if afraid that if she let go, everything she had left would vanish with it. The cool window pressed against her forehead as she leaned her head to the glass, her breath fading into a pale mist. The white house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and with it 3 years of Emily's life, 3 years wrapped in things that seemed trivial yet weighed heavier than any luggage. She remembered the very first afternoon she arrived, fresh out of her degree in child development, her hand trembling as she signed the contract. Lily had been only 2 then, crying endlessly, refusing to let anyone hold her. Emily had not tried to soothe her. She had simply sat on the floor, opened a picture book, and begun telling the story in silly voices. At some point, the crying stopped. Lily crawled toward her and placed her tiny hand on Emily's knee as if she had just made an important decision of her own. From that day on, they belonged to each other. The car passed the small park where Emily used to take Lily every afternoon. She remembered the soft, sunny days, the 2 of them sitting on a wooden bench, sharing a cookie, watching sparrows fight over crumbs. Lily would burst into laughter every time a braver bird hopped closer. Emily laughed too, but she always glanced around first, afraid Daniel might suddenly appear and see her laughing too loudly. There were moments like that, rare but warm, when Daniel would sit down beside them. No suit, no phone, just a tired father trying to be present. They ate ice cream, Lily sitting between them, her small hands holding on to both adults, like invisible threads binding them together. Emily closed her eyes. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She was not crying from anger. She was crying for the loss that was coming, for the absence that had not yet happened, but was already present in every breath she took. She would miss the smell of morning toast, the sound of small footsteps running down the hallway, Lily's voice calling Emmy whenever she had a nightmare. She would even miss the late dinners when Daniel came home, paused at the living room doorway, and watched the 2 of them sitting on the rug, watching cartoons. He always stood there for a few seconds, in silence. Emily always pretended not to notice, though her heart beat faster every time she felt his gaze. It was wrong. Emily knew that. She was only a child development aide, paid to care for his daughter. But emotions never ask for permission to exist. They simply grow quietly, little by little, in fleeting glances and seemingly meaningless moments. Perhaps that was why this pain ran so deep. The car turned off the familiar road, heading toward the boarding house where Emily would stay temporarily. A small room behind Mrs. Eleanor Brooks's home, with no garden, no long hallways, no children's laughter. Only a single bed, a tiny kitchen, and silence. Emily took a deep breath, as if bracing herself to return to her old life, the life before Lily, before that house, before she had accidentally allowed herself to feel that she belonged to a place that had never truly been hers. The car came to a stop. Emily opened her eyes. 3 years were now behind her, and ahead lay an emptiness she did not know how to fill. The car remained still in front of the boarding house for a few seconds, then quietly turned around. The suitcase was no longer on the back seat. The girl who had leaned her forehead against the window was no longer there. Only an empty row of seats remained, and the silence began its journey back to the Whitmore house. The silence did not arrive all at once. It crept into every corner, every room, as if the house itself needed time to realize that something important had just disappeared. Mrs. Thompson stood in the kitchen, her familiar hands washing the dishes after lunch. The plate struck the steel sink with more force than usual. She knew she was using too much strength, yet she did not stop. 20 years of working in this house had taught her how to remain silent, but not how to stop feeling injustice. She had seen Emily leave, the small suitcase, the slow footsteps, the slender shoulders trying to stay straight. Not a single word of farewell. Upstairs, Lily woke from her afternoon nap. She stepped into the hallway, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. "Emmy?" Lily called softly, her voice still heavy with sleep. There was no answer. She walked toward the small room beside her own, the room Emily had stayed in. The door was open. The bed was empty. The blanket was neatly folded, just as always. Lily stood there, silently staring at the empty space in front of her, as if waiting for someone to appear. 1 minute, then 2. Finally, she turned away, hugging her pillow tightly to her chest. That evening, dinner was served on time, just like every day. Everything was in its proper place. But one sound was missing. There was no silly storytelling in the kitchen, no quiet laughter when Lily spilled her water. Only the sound of knives touching plates and the steady ticking of the wall clock. Daniel sat at the head of the table, eating in silence. He told himself he had done what was necessary, that it was a reasonable decision, that everything would soon return to normal. But the very moment that thought appeared, he realized that something was wrong. Lily ate very little. She pushed the food around her plate, her eyes unfocused. When Mrs. Thompson asked if she wanted more milk, Lily shook her head. "Where is Emmy?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Daniel paused for a second. "Emily had to leave, sweetheart," he said, avoiding his daughter's blue eyes. "Sometimes adults have to follow their own paths." Lily did not reply. She simply lowered her head, her hands gripping the spoon tightly, as if trying to understand something beyond her ability. Night fell. Daniel sat alone in his study, the computer screen glowing with numbers he was not truly seeing. The silence was so dense he could hear the wind outside the window. "I did the right thing," he repeated it in his mind like a mantra. "I did the right thing." But as he passed through the hallway, Daniel stopped in front of Lily's door. It was slightly ajar. Inside, his daughter was curled up on her bed, hugging her familiar pillow, her tears soaking into the fabric. Lily was not crying out loud. She was only sobbing quietly, as if afraid of disturbing someone. Daniel stood there for a long time. For the first time that day, a feeling of unease slipped into his chest, small but sharp, like a crack that had just appeared in the very thing he had been trying so hard to believe was right. Daniel Whitmore had always told himself that he was a rational man. In business, he trusted numbers, data, and decisions untouched by emotion. But there are things that cannot be measured by spreadsheets, and Daniel learned that in the slowest and most painful way. Victoria Hale returned to his life on what seemed like an ordinary evening at a fundraising event in a neighboring city. She appeared with a flawless smile, an elegant dress, and the same soft voice unchanged by the years. Victoria was still the same, always knowing exactly what to say, always knowing how to make her presence feel necessary. She said she had heard about Claire's death, that she was sorry, that Daniel should not have to carry everything alone. Daniel, exhausted by the long strain of being both father and mother, was not alert enough to question why Victoria had reappeared at this exact moment. The meetings began sparsely. A dinner, a lunch. Victoria was always proper, always praising Lily for being well-behaved, even though the little girl rarely replied with more than polite phrases. Daniel did not think much of it. He assumed his daughter simply needed time. Until that morning. Victoria called, her voice as light as if she were mentioning a trivial detail. "Don't you find it strange?" she asked. "The way Emily looks at you." Daniel gave a faint laugh, thinking he had misheard. "What do you mean?" "I'm only saying this because I care about you and Lily," Victoria continued. "She's very devoted, yes, but that devotion sometimes goes beyond the boundaries of an employee. I've noticed her gaze when you're nearby. It isn't entirely innocent." Daniel was about to object. He said that Emily was a professional child development assistant, that she always put Lily first. But Victoria did not argue. She simply planted another question, gentle as a breeze skimming over water. A 4-year-old becoming overly attached to someone outside the family. Don't you think that's a problem? It isn't healthy. And just like that, the seed of doubt was planted. All that day, Daniel began to observe Emily differently. A fleeting glance when he entered the room. A smile that lingered a little longer when their eyes met. Things he had never noticed before now grew magnified in his mind. The truth was that Daniel himself had been looking at Emily more than he allowed himself to admit. Her gentleness with Lily, the way she listened, the way the house felt warmer when she was there. All of it unsettled him, and Daniel Whitmore hated being unsettled. Victoria had given a name to that fear, and instead of facing it, Daniel chose the easiest path, eliminating its source. The next morning, he called Emily into his office. He paid her in full. He kept his voice neutral. He gave no explanation because he did not know how to explain something he himself did not yet understand. It was a decision born of panic, dressed in the armor of reason, and Daniel convinced himself that it was the right thing to do until the silence in the house began to speak. The fever came on the third night after Emily left. At first, it was only slightly flushed cheeks and a mild fatigue that made Lily go to bed early. Daniel thought it was just a long day, a routine change she had not yet adjusted to. He did not call a doctor. He did not worry much. Until midnight, when a soft voice called from the upstairs bedroom. "Emmy!" Daniel shot upright, his heart pounding. He hurried up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. Lily was curled beneath the blankets, her forehead burning, her lips dry, murmuring a name that was no longer present. All through that night, Daniel sat beside his daughter's bed, changing cold cloths, the night lamp casting their shadows on the wall. In her fevered delirium, Lily did not call for him. She only called Emily, over and over, like an unconscious plea. The next morning, the doctor came and said it was just a common virus, nothing dangerous. But after he left, Lily still refused to eat, to play, to speak. She turned her face toward the wall, clutching her familiar pillow, her breathing heavy. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. "Are you okay, my angel?" he asked, trying to keep his voice gentle. Lily opened her eyes, her blue eyes shimmering with fever. She looked at him as if searching for someone behind his back. "Where is Emmy, Daddy?" Her voice was hoarse. Daniel swallowed hard. "Emily had to leave, sweetheart." "She didn't want to go," Lily said, shaking her head weakly. "I saw." Daniel froze. "What did you see?" "I woke up to use the bathroom," Lily said slowly, each word struggling through her exhaustion. "I saw Emmy crying in the bathroom. She wiped her tears like this." Lily raised her hand, imitating the motion, clumsy yet painfully precise. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "She said she didn't understand," Lily continued. "Said she hadn't done anything wrong. She said she would miss me very much." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "Why did you send her away?" The question was not an accusation. It was a naked truth, spoken by a child who did not yet know how to soften pain. Daniel was silent. There was no answer that was right enough. Lily turned her face toward him, her expression unusually serious for her age. "That woman? From the city," she said, her voice small but firm. "She doesn't love me." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. "Who are you talking about?" "Victoria," Lily replied. "She smiles, but her eyes are cold, like ice." She took a shallow breath and continued, as if knowing she had to say everything before becoming too tired. "Emmy isn't like that. Her eyes are warm, like Mommy's." Claire's name was not spoken, but it stood clearly between them. Daniel felt a sharp, deep pain in his chest. Lily closed her eyes, exhausted. Daniel bent down to kiss her forehead, his hand trembling slightly. Lily's words echoed in his mind, each one breaking through the wall of reason he had built. His daughter, 4 years old, had seen what he had deliberately refused to see. And for the first time since firing Emily, Daniel Whitmore was no longer confident enough to tell himself that he had done the right thing. Daniel left Lily's room after she had fallen back into sleep, her breathing still heavy, but more even. He stood silently in the hallway for a few seconds, as if needing time to relearn how to breathe after everything he had just heard. Downstairs, the kitchen lights were still on. Mrs. Thompson was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of thin chicken soup. The scent of ginger and scallions spread through the air, warm yet not enough to ease the heaviness in Daniel's chest. She did not turn around when she heard his footsteps, simply continuing to stir, as if she already knew he would come down. "She has a fever," Daniel said, his voice hoarse, "but the doctor says it isn't serious." "Yes, sir," Mrs. Thompson replied calmly, "but there is no medicine for sorrow." Daniel placed both hands on the marble counter and lowered his head. "I was wrong, wasn't I?" Mrs. Thompson paused. She turned to look at him, her eyes neither angry nor accusing, only carrying a long-worn weariness. "You were wrong," she said simply. "And you know it." Daniel took a deep breath. "What do you know about all of this?" The housekeeper turned back to the soup, as if recounting something obvious required no emotion. "When Lily had winter dermatitis last year, Emily stayed up 25 nights in a row. She slept on the floor of Lily's room, woke every 3 hours to check her temperature, apply medicine, and tell her stories. Her voice became so hoarse she could barely speak." Daniel closed his eyes. He had been in Chicago at the time, signing contracts, believing his daughter was being well cared for. "Victoria stopped by once," Mrs. Thompson continued. 20 minutes. She was afraid of catching the illness. She said she had an important party." Daniel had not known that detail, and suddenly, not knowing it felt heavier than any reproach. "I didn't say anything," she added quietly. "It wasn't my place, but if you ask whether I see a difference, I do. I always have." Daniel straightened, his throat tightening. "What should I do now?" Mrs. Thompson ladled soup into a bowl and placed it on a tray. The corner of her lips curved into a very faint smile. "You built an empire from nothing. I believe you are smart enough to know how to apologize to a 28-year-old young woman, a young woman who only wanted to do her job well." Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time in many days, a decision formed in his mind, not born of fear, but of genuine remorse. He needed to find Emily Carter. The small room behind Eleanor Brooks's house had a narrow window that looked out onto an old maple tree. Each morning, Emily woke to the sound of birds, and for a few brief seconds before opening her eyes completely, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned. No more the room beside Lily's, no more tiny footsteps running down the hallway, no more the smell of morning toast. Emily forced herself to sit up. A week had passed since she left the Whitmore house. 7 days that felt like 7 months, repeating in a rhythm so empty it was cruel. 6 in the morning, waking up. Brewing coffee in the chipped porcelain mug Mrs. Brooks had lent her. Sweeping the backyard to pay off the rent. A rushed lunch. Afternoons sending out job applications from an old phone. Evenings eating little, sleeping lightly. Then repeating. Eleanor Brooks was a 72-year-old widow. She did not ask why Emily had left her job, nor did she offer hollow comfort. Every Wednesday, she placed a bag of homemade cookies outside Emily's door. No knock, no note. That quiet kindness was all Emily could bear right now. One little bit more concern, and she would fall apart. At night, Emily lay staring at the ceiling, imagining how Lily might be sleeping. Was she hugging her familiar pillow? Was she waking in the night, calling Emily's name? Those unanswered questions tormented her more than any humiliation Daniel had caused. On the morning of the 8th day, while Emily was hanging laundry on the line, her phone vibrated in her pocket. An unfamiliar number, with the familiar area code of her old town. Her heart began to race before she had time to think. "Hello?" "Emily, it's me, Mrs. Thompson." The familiar voice made Emily's throat tighten instantly. "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding. "Lily, is she all right?" The pause lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make Emily's stomach knot. "She has a fever," Mrs. Thompson said. 3 days now. The doctor says it's only a virus, but I know it isn't just that. She isn't eating, isn't playing, she only calls your name." Emily felt her legs go weak. "A fever? Because of me?" she whispered. "I think so," the housekeeper replied, her voice holding restrained indignation. "Emily, everything happened too quickly. I know you still don't understand what went wrong, but I'm calling for another reason." Emily swallowed. "What is it?" "Mr. Daniel wants to speak with you." For a moment the world seemed to stop turning. Emily stared at the clothes swaying in the wind, not really seeing them. To speak? After everything that had happened. "You are not obligated to meet him," Mrs. Thompson added quickly. "He understands if you don't want to. But he's different now. At least, he seems to be. Last night he slept on a chair beside Lily's bed. I have never seen him do that." Emily closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to hang up, to say she owed no one anything more, that she had already been hurt enough. But just hearing Lily's name made every wall she had built grow fragile. "Where does he want to meet?" Emily asked hoarsely. "He will come to you if you allow it." Emily looked around the modest backyard, the old maple tree, the small room. Her life had shrunk to something painfully small. She had nothing left to lose. "Tomorrow," she said slowly. "In the morning. I'll be here." At 9:30 the next morning, Emily stood by the narrow window of her small room, her heart pounding as she heard a car stop outside the gate. She did not need to look to know who it was. Some presences are so familiar that feeling them is enough. Daniel Whitmore drove himself. There was no driver. No one accompanied him. He stepped out of the car and closed the door slowly, as if trying to stretch out the moment before facing what he was about to say. He wore dark jeans and a light shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired, thinner. His shoulders were no longer as straight as before. Emily took a deep breath and stepped into the yard. Their eyes met across the old wooden fence. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, not because there were no words, but because there were too many. "May I come in?" Daniel asked, his voice lower and hoarser than she remembered. Emily nodded and opened the gate. "You have 10 minutes." Daniel stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the modest space, the laundry line, the old maple tree, the cramped room behind the house. Emily felt herself being observed, but she said nothing. She crossed her arms over her chest and waited. "I owe you an apology," Daniel began, his voice no longer carrying its usual control. "An apology I probably have no right to ask you to accept." "Why did you fire me?" Emily cut in without preamble. "I want to hear the real reason." Daniel was silent for a second, then raised a hand to run it through his hair, a nervous gesture Emily had seen many times over the past 3 years. "Because I was a coward," he said, "and because I let someone else plant doubt in my mind." "Someone else?" Emily lifted an eyebrow. "Victoria," he said, the name seeming heavy on his tongue. "She said that the way you looked at me wasn't appropriate, that you might be blurring boundaries, that Lily was becoming too attached to you." The words fell between them like cold stones. Emily felt her face burn, both from embarrassment and anger. "And you believed her?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. "I did," Daniel admitted, meeting her eyes, "because believing was easier than facing the truth." "And what is the truth?" Emily asked, almost in a whisper. Daniel took a step toward her, then stopped, keeping his distance. "The truth is that I was also looking at you in a way I shouldn't have allowed myself to. I was afraid of that, afraid of my own feelings. And when Victoria named that fear, I panicked. I thought that if you disappeared, everything would return to order." Emily let out a short laugh without a trace of humor. "So you sent me away. Without a single explanation, you made me think I had done something terrible." "I know," Daniel said, his voice tightening, "and I will carry that regret for a very long time." Emily turned her face away, tears rising but not falling. "I cried for a whole week," she said. "I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. I missed Lily so much, I could barely breathe." Daniel closed his eyes. "I didn't come here to ask for your forgiveness," he said. "I came because my daughter needs you, and because you deserve to hear the truth." Emily turned back to look at him. "You think that's enough?" "No," Daniel replied. "I know it isn't, but I don't know where else to begin except by telling you everything and accepting whatever decision you make." A light breeze passed through the yard, rustling the maple leaves. Emily looked at the man before her, not the cold businessman of that earlier morning, but a weary father, a man who had just realized he had destroyed something precious. "How is Lily?" she finally asked. At the sound of his daughter's name, Daniel's expression changed. "She isn't well," he said softly. "And I think she won't be well until she sees you again." Emily closed her eyes. She knew in that moment that every decision that followed would no longer be simple. Emily did not respond immediately to Daniel's last words. She turned away, took a few slow steps toward the old maple tree, and placed her hand against its rough bark as if to steady herself. In her mind, Lily's image rose with painful clarity. Blue eyes, the voice calling Emmy whenever she woke in the middle of the night, the tight hugs that felt as though they never wanted to let go. "I will see Lily," Emily finally said, without turning back. "But not because of you, and not because of the job." Daniel lifted his head, a fragile flicker of hope passing through his eyes. "Thank you," he said, almost in a whisper. Emily turned to look at him, her gaze calm but firm. "Don't thank me too soon. I'm coming for Lily. She deserves an explanation. She deserves to know that I didn't abandon her." Daniel nodded. "I understand." They got into the car together. During the drive back to the Whitmore house, Emily stared out the window, familiar scenery sliding past like an old dream. The streets, the houses, the small park where she and Lily used to sit and watch birds, all of it was still there. Only she had changed. As soon as the car stopped at the gate, the front door flew open. Lily appeared on the steps, wearing pale pajamas, her hair in disarray. The instant she saw Emily, she froze as if she could not believe her eyes. Then Lily ran down, stumbled, nearly fell, and rushed straight into Emily's arms. "Emmy!" Lily sobbed, clinging tightly to her. "I knew you would come back." Emily knelt down and wrapped her arms around the small, trembling body in her embrace. The familiar scent of shampoo, the familiar heartbeat. Her tears fell into Lily's hair, no longer trying to hide. "I'm here," Emily whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. Not today." Daniel stood a few steps away, not intruding. He understood that this moment did not belong to him. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily sat across from Daniel in the kitchen. There was no more explosive anger, only the cold clarity of someone who had learned to protect herself. "If I come back," Emily said, "it will be on my terms." Daniel looked up. "Go on." "I want a formal contract, all benefits clearly stated. I want my private space respected, and I need time to see whether I can trust you again." Daniel did not hesitate. "I agree to everything." Emily nodded. "Then we will try again. But remember, I'm coming back for Lily, not for you." Daniel understood, and this time he did not try to argue. Emily's return was not marked by declarations or dramatic changes. It came quietly, seeping back into the rhythm of the Whitmore house like morning light slipping through the curtains, not sudden, but enough to chase away the darkness. Lily's laughter returned first. Not all at once, but little by little. At first, short sentences and hurried hugs, then gradually bright peals of laughter echoing through the hallways as Emily chased her in the garden. The house, silent for many days, began to breathe again. Daniel watched from a distance. He changed his routine in noticeable but understated ways. He came home earlier, set aside long meetings, and placed his phone down on the table during dinner. He listened to Lily talk about a bug in the garden or a new drawing she had made, without interrupting, without glancing at the clock. With Emily, he kept exactly the distance she had set. Polite questions, timely thank yous. No lingering looks as before. No unnecessary private conversations. Everything moved slowly, cautiously, as if one wrong step could shatter the fragile balance that had just been rebuilt. Emily noticed the change. She did not say it aloud, but she saw the way Daniel stood up to refill her water during meals. The way he asked about Lily's routine, about the emotional development methods Emily used. Not like a controlling employer, but like a father learning how to truly be present. The afternoons passed peacefully. Emily and Lily read books in the small library Claire had once arranged. Sunlight slanted through the windows, casting warm bands of light across the bookshelves and wooden floor. Lily leaned against Emily, small fingers tracing the illustrations, occasionally looking up to ask innocent questions. Daniel sometimes stood at the doorway, quietly watching the scene, not interfering, not disrupting, just remembering. It was Lily who broke the remaining reserve. One afternoon, while all three were in the garden, she suddenly asked in a very serious voice, "Daddy, why do you keep looking at Emmy like you want to say something?" Daniel froze. Emily bent down to pull weeds, pretending not to hear, though her heart beat faster. Lily smiled with satisfaction, as if she had confirmed something. And in that brief moment, an invisible door seemed to open. Not wide enough to step through, but wide enough to let the light in. That night came quietly, as if the Whitmore house itself knew it needed to keep still. After Lily had fallen asleep, Emily went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Soft yellow light spilled over the dining table where Daniel was sitting alone. In front of him was a half-finished glass of wine and a photo frame tilted in his hand. Emily paused at the doorway, hesitating, but Daniel had already sensed her presence. "Today is the day Claire died," he said without looking up. His voice was low and tired. 3 years now. Emily walked slowly closer and sat down in the chair across from him. In the frame was a young woman with softly falling brown hair and gentle blue eyes, exactly like Lily's. Claire's smile carried a warmth that made Emily unconsciously slow her breathing. "She's very beautiful," Emily said softly. Daniel nodded. "Beautiful on the inside as well." He brushed his thumb lightly across the glass. "There are days when I look at Lily and see Claire everywhere, in her eyes, in the way she tilts her head when she thinks." They sat in silence for a while. The wall clock ticked steadily. "I've never felt that I was betraying her," Daniel continued, as if confessing. "But sometimes I think, if I allow myself to move forward, does that mean I'm forgetting her?" Emily slowly shook her head. "Moving forward isn't forgetting," she said. "It's learning to carry the memory without letting it drown you." Daniel looked up at her. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Afraid to trust, afraid of hurting others, and afraid of being abandoned again." Emily took a deep breath. "I'm afraid too," she said, for the first time not avoiding it. "Afraid that one day I'll be cast aside again, as if I never truly belonged here." Their eyes met in the quiet. No defenses, no misunderstandings, just two people standing before their own true fears. Daniel gave a slight nod. "I won't rush," he said, "and I won't promise things I can't prove through my actions." Emily did not answer, but in her eyes the hardness had softened, like a door beginning to open, very slowly. Victoria Hale appeared on a lightly rainy afternoon, while Emily was in the library with Lily. The little girl was sitting on the rug, stacking colorful wooden blocks into a wobbly tower, while Emily read to her in a steady, gentle voice. The doorbell rang. Daniel stood up and went to open the door. When he saw Victoria, he hesitated slightly. She was as flawless as ever, light-colored coat, neatly styled hair, and that familiar smile resting on her lips like a carefully practiced mask. "I just want to talk for a few minutes," Victoria said. "I heard Emily has come back." Daniel nodded and opened the door wider, but he did not invite her into the living room. He stood at the entrance, polite enough, but no longer intimate. "We can talk here," he said. Victoria frowned slightly, then quickly regained her softness. "I'm only worried about you and Lily. I'm afraid you're repeating a mistake." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. For the first time, he did not let those gentle words slide past his ears. He looked at what lay behind them. "Victoria," he said slowly, "you planted doubt in my mind. You made me believe Emily was a danger, when she was the only person who had never harmed my daughter." "I was only telling the truth," Victoria objected. "She's an employee. She crossed boundaries." "No," Daniel cut in, his voice low but firm. "The one who crossed boundaries was me, and the one who took advantage of that was you." Victoria fell silent for a second. The smile on her lips faltered. "Lily says you have cold eyes," Daniel continued. "At first I thought it was just a child's words. But children don't pretend. They sense." Victoria gave a faint laugh. "You're trusting a 4-year-old more than a grown woman?" "I'm trusting actions," Daniel replied. "Emily stayed with Lily on nights I wasn't home. She loved her without asking for anything in return. And you only appeared when it was convenient." Silence stretched between them. Rain fell steadily on the steps. "This ends here," Daniel said clearly and calmly. "No more misunderstandings, no more returning." Victoria looked at him, finally unable to hide the bitterness in her eyes. "You'll regret this." Daniel shook his head. "I already have, and I won't do it again." He closed the door. Inside the library, Lily looked up at him. "Is she gone, Daddy?" "Yes," Daniel replied. Lily nodded with satisfaction, then turned to Emily and placed the final block on the tower. "Then that's good. Now our house is quiet again." Emily looked at Daniel. In his eyes there was no longer any hesitation, no shadow of the past intruding into the present, only a choice that had been confirmed through action. The next morning began with gentle sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of small, hurried footsteps running along the hallway. Emily had barely opened her eyes when her bedroom door flew open. Lily appeared, both arms wrapped around a tray larger than she could comfortably carry, with Daniel behind her, bent slightly to support the tray from underneath, deliberately letting his daughter believe she was doing it all by herself. "Breakfast for Emmy!" Lily exclaimed proudly. "I made it." Emily laughed and sat up on the bed. On the tray were slices of toast, slightly burnt at the edges, a steaming mug of cocoa milk, and a jar of jam clumsily left open. Beside them was a hastily picked bouquet from the garden, daisies, a few sprigs of mint, and even a small branch of rosemary. "Did you make all of this?" Emily asked, her heart softening. "Daddy helped a little," Lily whispered, tilting her head. "The knife is very sharp." Daniel stood at the doorway, looking more awkward than he ever had in any meeting. "May I come in?" "Come in, Daddy," Lily answered immediately. "Sit here. The bed is big." Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed, carefully keeping his distance. Lily climbed up to lie between them, as if it were the most natural place in the world. When Emily bit into the slightly burnt toast and praised it as delicious, Lily beamed. Then suddenly she grew serious. "Emmy," Lily said, her voice small but clear, "will you stay with me forever?" The question hung in the air. Emily felt her heart tighten. She looked at Daniel and saw him waiting, not pressing her. "Why are you asking that?" Emily asked gently. "Because I already asked Mommy in heaven," Lily said matter-of-factly. "I know Mommy really won't come back, but Mrs. Thompson said our hearts are very big and can love many people. I want to love Mommy in heaven and love Emmy too." Tears spilled from Emily's eyes. She pulled Lily into her arms, holding the small trembling body close. "I love you," Emily whispered, "more than you think." "So you'll stay?" Lily asked, her eyes lighting up. Emily took a deep breath. "Yes, I'll stay." Lily turned to Daniel with a serious expression. "Now it's Daddy's turn." Daniel laughed nervously. "My turn for what, Angel?" "You promise you'll ask Emmy," Lily said firmly. Daniel turned to Emily, his eyes filled with emotion. "Last night Lily came down to the kitchen," he said softly. "She asked if I was going to ask you to be my girlfriend." Emily laughed through her tears. Daniel leaned toward her, his voice trembling. "Emily Carter, I was wrong. I was a coward. But I love you, and I want to build a family with you, honestly and properly." Emily looked at both father and daughter, and in that moment all hesitation melted away. "Yes," she said softly. "I do." Lily squealed with joy and threw her arms around both of them, turning the moment into a warm, chaotic tangle of laughter and tears.